All right, Jim Tompkins, thanks for coming on, man.
Appreciate it. My pleasure to be here, Gunnar.
Hey, it's not often that you get somebody that's a supply chain leader on the show, and I was going through your LinkedIn, ran across you, and then I kind of went down the rabbit hole a little bit. I started doing some YouTube research on you, started watching the videos. I listened to your keynote that you did just here recently in March. It was very well done. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming on and about to share all the knowledge that you have with us.
Well, I appreciate that, Gunnar. I hope we haven't set expectations too high.
Nah, we haven't. Well, hey, I just kind
Good.
of want to go all the way to the back because I kind of want to get a backstory on you first, kind of set the tone. You know, kind of give me your personal story, kind of growing up as a kid through high school and stuff, and how you got into logistics and chose that as a career.
Well, I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, at a lower middle class family. My dad was a house painter. My mother was a teller at a bank, and I was an athlete in high school. I ran cross country. I was a wrestler, and I was a high jumper, and I really enjoyed all of that. And in fact, I enjoyed it so much I didn't spend a lot of time on my studies. So I thought I wanted to be an engineer because my dad told me I wanted to be an engineer because I could take things apart and put them back together again. But my dad really didn't know what an engineer was. He never went beyond high school. And so I was interested in going to school and becoming an engineer. I applied at Purdue, and being an out of state student from Illinois, I did not get accepted. So I went to Northern Illinois University in a pre-engineering program, and my dad understood my mentality fairly well. So he said, "I tell you what, I'll pay you for 1 year of school, but you're not interested in school. You're not going to study. You're not going to apply yourself. So after that 1 year, you're on your own." And so I went to school and got straight A's and got a scholarship for my sophomore year. And after my sophomore year, I was able to transfer into Purdue. Going to Purdue was a big move. The first day of class, I was used to wearing T-shirts and cutoffs, and we went to class at Purdue, and guys were wearing ties, and I thought, "Oh my goodness!" And the professor started saying, "Well, let's review what we did last year." And of course, what they did at Purdue the last year is not what I did at Northern Illinois University, and so it was a real challenge. But I applied myself, and it took me 2.5 more years to graduate because of the switching programs, and so the Army thought I would make a great soldier. And so they started drafting me. I decided that I would go on for my master's because for one additional year of school, I could double the amount of industrial engineering courses I took. So I went on for my master's. The draft board continued to draft me. I then got stung by the research bug in logistics and what today we call supply chain. Back then we called it material handling and industrial distribution. And I really enjoyed that. And so I went on for my PhD. And 3 months before I finished my PhD, the Army came again and said, "You will come now." And I said, "Well, what are my options?" And they said, "Well, you can go to Canada, you can commit suicide, you can go to jail, you can come now like a good American would, or you can enlist for 3 years and we will give you 3 months delayed entry." So I took the last choice. I finished my degree and went off to basic training as either Dr. Private Tompkins or Private Dr. Tompkins, depending upon what they needed done. Most
Sure.
people I was in basic training with got sent to Vietnam. Since I enlisted, I got sent to New Jersey and wound up having a very, very strong career. I basically ran the facility engineering function for Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And I got a chance to apply a lot of the stuff I learned at school. And my boss allowed me to do some consulting on the side. So my wife and I had a pretty good life in New Jersey in the Army. I left there, went to NC State, teaching industrial distribution, material handling, facilities planning, and also started a little consulting firm on the side. After 3 years of working both jobs, my wife pointed out that my full time income was 1/6 of my part time income. And so I left the university and decided to make my life's work at Tompkins International and stayed at Tompkins International until 2020 when I decided to leave and to begin Tompkins Ventures.
Now, obviously, Tompkins International was your baby, right? I mean, it's your name. That's everything. So, and that was 45 plus years of you being there in the supply chain industry. So the amount of experience that you have is I mean, lack of better words, crazy, right? I mean, a lot of us
Yeah.
will never reach that much experience in supply chain, and we think we know what we're talking about. I come from a brokerage. The company I come from prior also had assets, and we do have assets here too. But I mainly just know one little specific aspect of logistics, and I'm sure you're talking about material handling and industrial distribution. It wasn't even called the same thing as it is now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, how was it different back then? When I say back then, I'm assuming 70s and 80s than it is now.
Well, in the mid 70s, I started teaching a course called, we called it PWO, stood for Planning and Managing Warehouse Operations. And Planning and Managing Warehouse Operations was a relatively basic course from an academic point of view. But it took what my work in my PhD and my work of running a warehouse in the Army for the facility engineer at Fort Monmouth and my practical experience there. And I took that all down and taught it in a 2-day course. That course went over well, and NC State said they wanted to offer it twice a year. And I said, why not more? They said, well, that's what the market will bear. I said, what's the market? They said, well, about a 3-hour drive from Raleigh. And so I went 5 hours north to Virginia Tech. I went 5 hours east to Old Dominion. I went 5 hours south to University of South Carolina. I went 6 hours west to University of Tennessee. And I offered the course at all 5 of those universities. Um, I then got involved more with that. And as I taught the course, I found out there was a huge demand for this type of information, relatively basic warehouse knowledge. And so we built the consulting practice on that course. And what we were doing there is the basics of how to lay out a warehouse, how to utilize your space well, how to use your labor well, how to use the material handling equipment. We got into automated material handling systems. We started that in the year 2000. We started a robotics company, Tompkins Robotics, in 2015. And so what we saw is back in the 1975 to 1980 timeframe, it was really the dark ages. We were just focused on the warehouse itself and nothing outside of that. But starting in 1980, then we added some inventory, and then we added network planning, and then we added transportation. And then in 1985, we added the whole technology suite. There was no technology suite for logistics before 1985. And so we started with warehouse management systems and then transportation management systems. And so we then go into inventory and S&OP, and really doing some really cool work in a broader field than just distribution, moving it to logistics. And then starting in the early 90s, we moved into the word supply chain. And supply chain, when we began it back in 1992, 1993, the objective was efficiency. How do we take cost out of the supply chain? And so we looked at reducing inventory costs, reducing transportation costs, and it was a cost reduction outreach of supply chain. But if we move that clock forward to say 2005, so it was a long time. It was 10, 12 years before we really started thinking of supply chain as not only taking cost out, but also adding value to the customer. And by providing better customer service and quicker customer service, that we could start actually increasing the top line. So the first 12 years of supply chain was cost reduction, it was bottom line. But then what we started doing is we started really working on the top line and growing revenue. And we stayed there as a revenue producing cost reduction outreach and supply chain until 2020. And then when the COVID hit, we saw there was a whole period of respect. My wife and I have been married for 53 years, and she spent the first 48 of those telling people what her husband did with supply chain, and no one understood what she meant. She explained it to our kids, to our grandkids. No one understood what supply chain was. And then all of a sudden, in March and April, my wife's girlfriend started saying to her, we can't get toilet paper. We can't get tomato soup. We can't get this in the store. Is that supply chain? They're talking about supply chain on the news. Is that what Jim does? And my wife said, yeah, that's what Jim does. And so we grew in respect in 2020. And then as we moved into 2021, we got the last R of what I call this EERR, efficiency, effectiveness, respect, and then resilience. And we understood that the supply chain, as we had done all the way back to the 1992, where we were looking at a very deterministic, a very consistent model where the past was a good projection for the future. And we could rely on the past to understand what's going to happen in the future. But when COVID hit, the future just became unknown. We didn't know what our supply was. We thought the ship was going to arrive, but it didn't. And we waited and we waited. We thought we understood the demand, but now customers were all living from home, working from home. And so there was a different demand structure. And so the supply was out of control. The demand was out of control. We didn't have control of the time frames of things. And so the supply chain in 2021, as a result of COVID, basically fell apart. It just collapsed. And so this resilience movement of 2021, 2022 is saying, how do we deal with the uncertainty, with the disruptions that are brought about through COVID? And so it was a real new period. So I've had the pleasure of watching this beast go from, before it was born and what were the basics of it, all the way up through adulthood and now into a whole new profession that everyone thinks is important and exciting. So it has been amazing. And supply chain is a funny subject in that it's very broad and very deep. And so there's people out there, Gunnar, that well, that are transportation experts. And so they're narrow, but they're deep. There's other people that know inventory. There's other people that know material handling. There's other people that know warehousing. There's other people that know last mile and so forth. And so it's very broad and very deep. So the reason I've enjoyed it for all these years is no matter how much experience I have and how much I learn, there's always more. There's always more cool things to learn and apply to pull together the very complex field of supply chain.
Yeah, each category you just mentioned right there, whether it's inventory, warehousing, the final mile, transportation, all of it, it is so deep that you have experts in each niche. And also you have experts in each niche of each niche. Like there's the logistics, there's the 3PLs, there's the brokers, there's your asset base, your chemicals, your tank. Like there's so many different variations that you can go through in transportation that you can never learn at all. And that's the reason why I like doing this right here, is getting as many people as I can on here to learn as much as I can. And obviously with you, you know a little bit about everything, which is fantastic. Well, you know a whole lot about everything, but you could always learn more, right? So what would you say is the most fascinating aspect to supply chain as a whole?
Well, I guess the most fascinating single aspect would be the challenges we have to adapting to the reality as we begin to come out of this COVID phase and understanding where we are going forward. The fact of the matter is the new normal is disruption. We're going to have continued disruptions. COVID will be passing away into the history, but we have, the Ukrainian war. We have the floods in Australia. We have the ship caught in the Baltimore port. We have constant disruptions. We're going to have what's going to happen with the strike on the West Coast next month in June. And so it's going to be a challenging time where there's constant disruption. What we need to do is we need to learn within those disruptions how to respond. So, for example, automation of material handling. We used to do it because it was giving us the best return on investment. And we did an economic analysis and went through the whole thing and then came up, this is the solution that'll give you the best return on investment. Today, however, we still do the ROI analysis, but guess what? We don't do it for ROI. We do it because there's not enough labor to get the job done if you don't automate. And so it's this adjusting of thinking. There's people arguing about, well, did we go too far with just in time? Should we go back to just in case? Should we build larger inventory piles so that we have enough in case something changes? Well, the answer to that is absolutely not. We cannot afford to go back to just in case. But what we need to do is we need to develop systems that are resilient and agile and adaptable to allow us to have the amount of inventory that's needed to fulfill the customer without having excessive inventory. And the same across the whole supply chain. What is the good delivery for e-commerce? I can recall 5 years ago when we said, well, if you could get 30% delivered in 2 days and the rest of it in 3 or 4 days, you were doing pretty well. We now are talking about, is it 3 hours or 4 hours of delivery for those high volume items? And then the slower mover items still have to be delivered in 2 days. And so that's a whole change in thought process. So the thing I love about supply chain is every time you think you optimize something, you find out there's a different requirement being placed upon you. In fact, as a PhD engineer, industrial engineer, what I do is I optimize things. I've learned optimization isn't what it's supposed to be. And in fact, what I do now is not optimize, but I optionize. It's not football where your job is to knock that player in front of you down. It's basketball. You're bringing the ball up the court. And if the defense does this, I want you to do this. But if the defense does this, I want you to do this. If the defense does this, I want. So you have options. And so what we need to have is solutions which are much more adaptable to a variety of options so that we can function even though these disruptions are going to continue to happen.
So I'm a former football player, so I can kind of break it down that way. So you're talking about you pretty much need a play for every potential play that you're going to see in the game, right?
Yes.
And you need to have a solution for each option instead of optimizing. You need to optionize. That's a really good term. You need to trademark that, get that thing copyrighted right there.
Well,
there's your next book.
I did invent it, and it is in one of my books, but now I see it being used quite a bit now. So optionization is an important aspect of being prepared to handle the uncertain future. Right on.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's a really good quote you had there. So other than that aspect of it, let's jump into the ventures a little bit. Let's talk about that. So obviously it's also dealing with the supply chain because that's been your entire life. What else is the ventures doing? I see that it's leadership, it's business development, it's structure. What all is ventures about?
So when COVID hit Tompkins International and I decided to step down, I felt we needed to do some pay cuts and we could save a lot of other people's jobs by me stepping down. And so that was a relatively quick decision on my part. And I didn't really have a plan for what I wanted to do next. So while I was transitioning out of Tompkins International, the phone rang. And it was a guy that I had known for 4 or 5 years. We had designed a distribution center for him. His board did not approve moving forward. COVID was very good to his firm. And so his firm had tripled in the 1 month since COVID had happened. And he needed this distribution center built. And so he called me. He said, Jim, that distribution center that your firm built for us, we need to build it. I said, well, let me put you in touch with the consultants that worked on that project. They said, no, we don't need consulting. We need industrial development. I said, well, I don't do industrial development. That's not what I do. And he says, but Jim, you know a lot of people. I said, well, yeah, I do. And he said, well, could you help me? I said, well, yeah, I could make some calls. I said, if I recall, that facility was supposed to be in Savannah, Georgia. It's supposed to be around 450,000 square feet. He says, yeah. He said, well, I said, well, let me make a couple calls. I know people that own some land in Savannah. Let me see if I can work something out. I made a couple calls, found a guy that was interested, put the two people together, and they kind of then did a deal. And lo and behold, I got a check in the mail for thanking me for helping solve this problem. And I thought, boy, that's interesting. About that same time, another guy called me up, and he had made an invention of injection molding cap. And he needed to go from injection molding to injection molding and blow molding. And to do that, he needed $50 million. And I said, well, I don't have $50 million. Why are you calling me? He said, well, you know a lot of people. I said, well, yes, I've had the honor of working with a lot of private equity companies, and I know a lot of private equity companies. I said, let me make some calls. And so I made a few calls, put some things together, and lo and behold, I helped him, and I got another check in the mail. So here I was transitioning out of Tompkins International, and all of a sudden, these people were calling me, and I was helping them, and not doing the consulting work, but do more of a connector. This guy's got a problem. This guy has a solution. I put them together, and I collect a small fee. And so that's what was kind of happening. And in June of 2020, a friend of mine called who had retired several years earlier. He was young, but he sold his company, made a fortune. He and his wife moved to Phoenix, lived on a country club. He played golf every day. And I'd talked to him 2 or 3 times since he left his company. And he was doing well. His golf game was up and everything was fine. Well, he calls me in June of 2020. And he says, Jim, he said, we have a real problem here in that I'm not able to golf anymore. I hurt my shoulder, and so I can't golf. And so I'm just kind of hanging around the house, and I'm driving my wife crazy, and she wants me out of the house. I wonder if I could do some consulting for you. I said, well, I really don't do consulting anymore. He said, what are you doing? Well, I told him about the guy that needed the building built, and I told him about the guy that needed the capital. And he said, Jim, this is a great business. He said, I know a lot of people. Why don't I work with you? I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, if I brought you a deal and we made $50,000, what would you do with $50,000? I said, well, I'd give you half and I'd take half. He said, well, that's what I'm thinking. He said, what do you call this business? I said, what do I call this business? I said, I call this business answer the phone. I mean, the phone rings, I pick it up and say hello, and a guy needs something and I help him. He said, Jim, you got to have a name for it. I said, well, call it Tompkins Ventures. And so that became the name of it. And he became the first partner of Tompkins Ventures. Today, I have 64 partners of Tompkins Ventures located in China, Indonesia, Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, India, South Africa, Ghana, Europe, UK, South America, Panama, US, Canada, Mexico, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. And so I've got partners all over the world that we find someone that has a problem. And then what we do is we connect that problem with our over 200 commercial partners to solve the problem. And then we get a finder's fee. And so
Wow.
that's what the business was up until May of 2022. In May of 2022, we're going to add to the Tompkins Ventures business. We're essentially going to double the business. If you look at the practices we do now, we do leadership, as you mentioned. We do industrial development. We do raising capital. We do technology, and we do logistics. But what we do in those areas, what people needed for the last 2 years. For the last 2 years, people basically played defense. And so they were saying, how do I fix this problem? How do I fix this problem? How do I fix this? You know, it's kind of like when your shirt's on fire, it's kind of hard to worry about if your hair's combed. And so that
Sure.
people were disrupted. They weren't able to produce. And so it's been playing defense. Well, now as we start to come out of the COVID phase, all of a sudden leadership are saying, wow, in addition to playing defense, we got to play offense. Our business has changed substantially. We're doing things differently, but we don't have a new strategy for this business. And so what we're now doing was not only playing defense by solving problems, we're also playing offense, but not by having commercial partners, but having consulting partners. And we're going to announce this in May, but it's almost May, so I thought I could mention it to you today. And so what
There
we're
we
doing
go.
is playing offense and defense. And so really, really cool in the same 5 areas, but we can both solve a problem as well as develop a strategy and carry it on to the future. So it's really exciting. I wish I could say I had this brilliant idea for Tompkins Ventures and I thought it up because I'm really smart, but that wouldn't be true. The fact of the matter is, it was just God just handed it to me. He said, Jim, here's a phone call, deal with it. Here's a phone call, deal with it. And now I got a company called Tompkins Ventures that is really, really doing well, and I'm excited about it.
Hey, that's really cool. And you're very passionate about it. That's the first step, right? You got to be very passionate about what you do. And obviously you are, and you have the knowledge to back it up. So let's segue a little bit, because in order to have a business and to make it successful, you have to be able to sell, you have to be able to promote, market, get it out there. Now, obviously you have people coming to you at the beginning, which is how it was created. But now as you're going out into different countries and trying to, break the news right here on the Chat with Gunner podcast, as you're bringing this different avenue to it, how's your sales process? How would you say your sales skills are, and how important is it?
Well, being able to relate to people and being able to understand their problem, not to think about what you're trying to sell, but try to think about where is the potential client? What is the pain that he's having now? And to really be able to listen and understand what that is. When I was 40 years old, I couldn't do this. I mean, I listened pretty good when I was 40 because I was selling consulting services, but I didn't have the breadth of understanding to really be able to analyze what does this guy really need to help him. And so now, I don't really, I think my greatest sales skill is empathy. I'm able to understand what the person's situation is and able to help them. So I don't really think of myself as selling something. I don't, my 64 partners, we don't sell something to our clients. What we do is we help them. I mean, it's like, if I'm driving on the road and I see you at the side of the road with a flat tire and I pull over to help you to fix the flat tire, I'm not trying to sell you something. I'm trying to help you. I'm saying, hey, Gunner, can I hold the flashlight while you're taking the lugs off? And so I'm helping you. So that's how I view it. And then clients come to like that. They feel good about that. So when they have the next problem or the next opportunity, what they do is they call me up and say, hey, Jim, what do you know about this? Are you interested in this issue? Do you have any? What are you doing on reverse logistics? What are you doing on this whole third party information thing now being illegal and people need to develop personalized information? What are you doing about the supply chain that doesn't work? How are you doing something that can help us with this problem we got? And that's what we do. So I think my greatest sales skill is empathy, and my greatest ability to deliver for the client is that I really, 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 really listen and have the knowledge. So most of my partners are people in 50s and 60s that have had a great career. A lot of them have been C-level. Most of them have been at least VP level. And so they've run major operations. So they hear somebody and say, wow, how about this? Now, some of them, for example, don't have a lot of experience in capital formation. I have. So they call me up and say, Jim, I have a problem like this, this, and this. I had yesterday 2 new opportunities to work on capital projects. One is a company that does really cool stuff in cybersecurity. One is a huge need for a new port in the Dominican Republic. And so these are 2 opportunities yesterday that came to me where there's a need for capital. My partners have great understanding of supply chain, but they're not so strong on the capital side. So they call me and say, Jim, how can we help these people? And so that's how we've been able to be successful. And it's resulted in a really high completion rate on projects. I mean, if we write a proposal, we get the work. I mean, so it's not like we're trying to improve our batting average. We're just trying to get up to bat more.
Here you go, trying to take some more swings at it.
Man.
So pretty much your biggest thing is identifying the problem and giving the solution in an empathetic way. That's pretty much
Yes.
what you're saying.
Well
And through that, you've been able to grab a bunch of referrals and people are coming to you, and you're pretty much the middleman putting together equity partners and capital partners with people that have system and processes over all of your experience and bringing it all together. That's pretty much Tompkins Ventures, correct?
Yeah, and for the capital, the entrepreneurial growth practice, absolutely. But in the logistics practice, the typical question we get is, "Hey, we did a China plus one strategy in 1999, and now we're producing 30% of our product in Vietnam. We've got 20 containers in Vietnam. We can't move. Can you help me?" And so
Gotcha.
we have contacts of people that know how to get product out of Vietnam. And so we get that scheduled and we get it moved. And then they say, boy, you guys did that really well. Can you also move stuff out of China? We say, well, yeah, we can do that. And they, well, that's really well. So it's each of the practices has its own personality. Probably the one that's most firefighting is the logistics one, because we're all getting stiffed and these prices, my goodness sakes, are killing us all.
Oh yeah.
And so that's a big deal. And some people are saying to us, well, we got one company saying to us, Jim, the cost of moving the shoes that we buy out of China is so high. Can you help us with an alternative sourcing? Well, I've got a very strong partner in Brazil, and we're working with them. And we have found that Brazil, for both shoes and furniture, has a tremendous industry that produce high quality, as good or better than China, and it's produced in our own hemisphere. We can get it to the U.S. much quicker, and we can get it to the U.S. much cheaper, about a fourth of the price to get it moved to the U.S. And we're getting a similar pricing as we got to the U.S. So the landed cost coming out of Brazil is better than the landed cost out of China, and we can get it to you quicker and with more reliability. So that's a kind of thing we're doing, and it's really cool when someone throws us a problem that we don't know what to do. Several of us get together and we talk about, now what could we do? How do we do this? And we say, oh, I met a guy that has this solution, and we go talk to them, make them commercial partners. In fact, I had breakfast this morning with a new potential commercial partner, and it's really cool how it kind of all comes together.
That is really cool. So,
Yeah.
and what's even more fascinating is that you're so international with everything. Because with us, I mean, we're just domestic. All I've ever done for the most part is domestic. We've done at my previous employer a few things into like Puerto Rico and stuff, but I mean, that's nothing compared to where you're at. You're all over the place. So, how do you build up that network across the globe? Is it just doing it for a long period of time, or is it just a strategic
Well,
way of networking?
um, there's no science to it, Gunnar. Um, when I was trying to build up Tompkins International. I wrote books, I gave speeches, I did podcasts, I did YouTube. I mean, I used every channel that was out there. And I tried to do a good job at everything I did. And people kind of said, gee, Jim's a good guy. He's a good resource. I got a call yesterday from a guy I haven't talked to in 5 years. He said, Jim, we got a group coming together to talk about investments in the supply chain space. And we would like to pay you to come to New York City to give a speech for us. And you kind of just, I had another call yesterday, a guy that wants me to come and give a speech at a South American conference. It's an online thing, and so I mean, it's just nonstop. Once you get it going, people think of you, and they have one of my books on their shelves. I've written 30 books, and written 31. The 31st book I just finished. It's called Insightful Leadership, and that book will be out. Not like in the old days, it took a year. Now it'll be out in about 2 months, and I literally finished writing it last weekend. So excited about that.
Wow. Oh, so explain. I'm very interested about that. Explain writing a book, the process of getting that out there. I mean, you've written 31 of them. It's crazy. I haven't even written a paragraph of a book. So how do you? What's your process of writing a book, and how do you get that done?
Well, I don't sit down and say this is what I know, and therefore I'm going to write a book. What I do is I say, boy, here's something I don't understand. How the heck does this work? And so I start writing. In the old days, I used the pen and paper. Now, of course, I'm on the computer. But um, I say about 90% of what I write, I throw away because I'm thinking about something, and then I get up the next day and say, well, that's not right. And you have to do this, then you have to do this. So I'm trying to uncover something that I don't know. And the way I do that is through writing. Now, the other thing is nobody has ever written a book. All you can do is write a couple paragraphs and then a couple more and then a chapter and then next chapter. But the concept of I'm going to write a book is so daunting, no one would ever write a book. And so what you can do is you can just start doing an outline, and then you figure out what's in chapter one, and then you kind of write the first part of chapter one, and then you do it again. At least that's how I do it. It's a very iterative process. And I iterate and I think and I think and I think. The latest book I wrote, and I said, why are some companies able to anticipate the future, and some entrepreneurs are able to anticipate the future and see how things are going to turn out, and therefore do things today that gets me ahead of the competition tomorrow? That's the what the heck's going on here? And I went back to some of the speeches I gave in 2012, 2013, 2014, talking about e-commerce and where e-commerce was going to go. And it's amazing. I recall a speech I gave in the 21 Club in New York City. I had about 220 investment people on the second floor of the 21 Club. And I was talking about Alibaba and Amazon. Alibaba was 1 month away from an IPO. And there was a guy in the audience that stood up. His face was all red. This was a dinner thing, so he probably had too many glasses of wine. He says, you gotta be stupid. No one will ever put a product on my porch and do it in a way that they can make a profit. Amazon has never made a profit. Alibaba has never made a profit. Those companies will not exist. By 2017, we won't even know they existed. And I said, sir, I don't believe that's right. And he got yelling and so forth again. And I started then looking, where's the exit? And the exit was on the other side of the room. And I thought, oh, wow, how am I going to get out of here? But so I had a vision of where something was going to be going. And how did I get that vision? It's by studying and studying and studying what was going on, by looking at the trends and then gaining some foresight of what the future was going to look like, and then taking that foresight and creating insight into how to create a business that was going to be successful. And so that's how I developed the process. And so that's what the book Insightful Leadership is about. How do you develop that insight to get ahead of the competition while they're still planning on doing today's business while you're doing tomorrow's business today?
That's great. And it reminds me of the way Ray Dalio thinks about finances and the stock market, because his things, his principles and systems and principles, and he's on the New World Order. He just had his new book come out, kind of very similar to that. So you're kind of thinking that way, except in the supply chain and that market of things, which is very similar to the financial market, and kind of, goes along with it. If you follow it closely, you're going to see it's going to ebb and flow with the finances and the stocks.
Amen.
So let's bounce. We 35 minutes in. Let's go a little bit longer, if you'll let me. You got a little bit more time for me?
Oh, sure. All yours,
Awesome.
Gunner.
Awesome. So, you know, when you get out of the ventures, what are you doing on a daily basis? A lot of people want to talk about their careers. They want to talk about their professions. Obviously, you're very passionate about supply chain. But who's Jim Tompkins the man? Like, what are you doing on a daily basis? What do you enjoy? What are your hobbies? What makes you happy?
So, if I enjoyed fishing as much as I do supply chain, you would call me a bum. So I have really only three hobbies. Number one is my family. Number two is my grandchildren. And number three is supply chain. And if you look at me, and also right now, I'm very excited about the Carolina Hurricanes, who I hope are going to win a Stanley Cup. And so we got to filter that one in. But that's not at the same level as family, grandchildren, and supply chain. But
Sure.
um, so what I do is I get up early in the morning and I'm writing a blog or preparing to give a speech or doing something new, asking where are the boundaries of supply chain going and how can we advance the profession of supply chain given where we are and given this level of disruption. And so I'm just passionate about doing stuff that helps companies become more successful, more profitable. This whole Ukrainian-Russian conflict, my goodness sakes alive, the impacts of that on supply chain are huge. But you also get an opportunity, if you study it, to look at the technology where Ukraine has the Western semiconductor capability, Russia does not. So Russia's over there shooting 40 dumb bombs to hit one target, whereas the Ukrainians are shooting one bomb at them because of the smart technology and the semiconductors and hitting it nose on. And so it's really an example of how the old versus the new. Russia's old. Russia is not able to do things like Ukraine can, and therefore Ukraine is ultimately going to wind up the winner of this conflict because technology wins. So how can we do technology in supply chain? How can we make things happen in supply chain to make this a greater contributing force to the profitability of our companies?
Sure. So let's talk about that in the transportation side, which is where I'm at. So technology, do you see there being, no need for just people working in brokerages or in offices or in transportation companies? Or do you see things going to electric vehicles with Tesla? Like, where do you see logistics going in 5, 10, 15 years? Is it all digital? Is it all technology? Is it all electric? Or are we still kind of doing it the old fashioned way because it's kind of a industry that we have to rely on hard labor and people?
Well, it's going to be a combination of both. I think the technology is going to support people. The people are still critical aspects of getting the job done. And that is in being brokerage or being people that are unloading trucks or picking orders or taking the orders. I mean, we're still going to have a need for people, and the logistics industry is going to have more and more people if we can hire them. If we can hire them. The things where we're going to be using technology is, for example, I believe the word supply chain is somewhat obsolete. We need to replace the word chain with a network. And what we need to have is an end to end network where everybody in the network at the same time has real time information as to what's going on in the network. And if we have that visibility, we then can take the unpredictable and understand what's going to happen so we can then allow ourselves to deliver the product on time to the customer without having excessive inventory. As demand shifts, we need to have a real time view of that so that we can impact what's happening with the supply and the delivery. So the technology is a key portion, the automation is a key portion. Now, are we going to have autonomous vehicles running up and down the road and so forth? Technologically, we can, but I don't think that's going to be economical. I think what we're going to find is we are going to have some routes which are going to be where trucks are going from point to point over long distances that are going to be automated. We're not going to need a driver. But I think most of the part, if you're talking about taking a truck and delivering it to a warehouse, backing in for crying out loud, the amount of talent it takes to do that is huge. And so we're going to have a lot of truckers that are still going to be driving. They're not going to be doing the long hauls. They're going to be doing more the city delivery and the warehouse delivery. Our warehouses are going to be much more localized because we need to get the product to the customer quickly. In the old days, we used to be able to deliver either quickly or inexpensively. And so if you did it quick, it cost a lot. If you did it slow, it was inexpensive. But now what does a customer today want? They want quick and inexpensive. Well, now wait a minute. You got two choices. You can go quick and expensive, or slow and cheap. No. I want quick and inexpensive. Well, how can we do that? Well, we can't travel faster. What we have to do is travel less far. And so that means we got to localize our fulfillment centers. And so that's why folks like Walmart and Target, using their stores for fulfillment, buy online, pick up in store, like a lot of grocery chains are doing, is really, really, really brilliant and the right way to go. But now we need the automation, the technology allow us to pick those each orders, because now it's not me and the wife going to the store taking things off the shelf. We're going to need to have a system to pick those orders. And that's, in fact, what Tompkins Robotics is about. So there's some really cool things that we can do to augment the human, but the human is a critical portion of the supply chain, is going to continue to be. And I think when we do a lot of automation, we're going to need people that have upgraded skills. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal last week that said, from blue collar to new collar. And it was talking about a person that was making $25,000 a year picking orders, that now all of a sudden has become a technology worker and is making $90,000 a year. When I read the article, I literally got tears in my eyes, because I'm thinking I was talking about this particular lady, and I say, "Go, babe, go, go!" I mean, I just love it, and it's so exciting to see
Right.
people upgrade their standard of living and be able to provide for their families, and it's really cool.
And it's such a great industry to do that in. There's a lot of money to be made in this industry, whichever niche you want to go in, whether it's, like you said, warehousing, inventory, picking, planning, logistics, transport, however it is, you can make a lot of money in it. Um, Before we get off here, I ask everybody the same question, especially when it comes to sales and logistics, and this: if you had one tip to give to someone who's coming out of college and getting into the supply networking industry, what would you have them do? What would you suggest them do?
Say what you do and do what you say. Your
Say what you do and do what
reputation,
you
your
say.
credibility is absolutely going to dictate the success you have. And if you can't say what you do and do what you say, you're not going to be successful at the level that you would like to be. And so it gets down to your value system and your character, and that's the foundation of everyone's success. And if you don't have that, when I I recently fired two of my Tompkins Ventures partners. Why? They didn't have the character that we needed to allow us to be successful. I had to step up and take that decision because they didn't have the character to get the job done. If I didn't do that, I would disappoint the other 64 partners. And so it's important that we really, really have a value system that treats people with dignity, and we treat them as partners and not as employees. And we really look at how can we lead people to a more successful career. You can't manage people to more successful careers.
Sure. No, that's great. That's really great to take that responsibility on, and to say that on here. I mean, that's just the tough conversations are the ones that you have to have in order to grow your business, and to make it right for the people that are doing the right thing.
Right
Um,
on.
I'll tell you what, I've got one more thing for you, and that's just thank you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for going everything in such great detail that you did. Where could everybody follow you at? You're on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn? Where are you at? What's your profiles?
LinkedIn is where I spend most of my time. I do have a twit. I do have someone that does me on Facebook, but it's not really me. If you really want to talk to me, it's on LinkedIn. All the response on LinkedIn is me. I actually type those, and you can tell by my spelling.
I'm right there with you. Well, Jim, hey, I really appreciate you coming on. If you got anything else to add or to say, go ahead and do it. If not, we're gonna go ahead and get off here. I know you're busy. I know time is very important. We'll let you get on with your day, and keep crushing it with Tompkins Ventures.
Well, I appreciate that, Gunnar. The only thing I have to say is to thank you for having me. I enjoyed being here, and I love your thoughtfulness, and keep it up. You're doing a great job.
Hey, I'd love to get you back on maybe here in a few months and check back in with you.
Awesome.
Yes, sir. We'll see you later.
All the best.